So, welcome back to 3rd Age Reforged and to another battle replay and to another custom scenario from Eclipse 2500 of the Dark Cloud, albeit this is going to be a map that will be included in the next patch of the game, not too dissimilar to those that were added in the previous patches and around the previous patches as well as part of individual map packs. So this is of course a more eastern inspired city, so we'll go through a little bit about what this is. I'm not entirely sure what to call this city at the moment. There's plenty of Haradrim locations that I could use. Probably not the southern one near that oasis. That always had a bit more of a tribal feel to me, whereas this is a little bit more of the urbanised men of the south by the looks of things. So it will be a Haradrim force on the defence and a large Gondorian army trying to bring this city down. I don't know if this is part 2 of the previous battle that we saw where Mordor overran the Gondorian city, but it would be quite a bold move to go on the attack of one of Mordor's allies after such a humbling defeat. But it does have that feel that a lot of these maps do, where it's a winding area through the city, several ways in, but ultimately there will be a location back up here near this fine looking palace that the Haradrim can potentially retreat to as a final stand to make the battlefield as narrow as possible. Overall, I would say this map actually reminds me a bit more of a reasonable size of the old version of Pelagia that was in the game once upon a time, albeit the reliability issues with that map were pretty severe. Hopefully this one is not the same. I doubt it is, because the size of this map, relatively speaking, or at least the size of the city on the map, is a lot less. Pelagia took up most of the map, and that was part of the problem. But it is a very nice looking thing. Lots of defensive positions, lots of areas the defenders can take up, but also this means there's plenty of angles for them to cover when the attackers attack them. Now it does say 67,000 frames up there, but what I will say is there is a period of manoeuvring at the start of this battle, so I was told, so it's very likely that there will be a decent chunk cut out of the start before we actually get into the battle itself, especially seeing as 3 of the Haradrim armies, the deployment zones are actually outside the settlement, so there's probably going to be a good deal of moving around. We shall start off with the Gondorian attackers, starting off with DF Morris. He has got some Gondor archers with the armour upgrades. Certainly in terms of skirmishing, Gondor will have the edge over Harad. Harad will have to rely on the fact that they can use the city as cover, they can use superior positions so that their lower quality archers can still be useful against Gondor's more bulky ones, but also, you know, Harad can maybe corral them to get a little bit closer and to use those javelins that they are very well known for. If it does come down to a pure slugfest at range, however, Gondor will be very happy with that. Upgraded Gondor archers like this are very good in such a fight, and he also has some fully upgraded veterans of Osgiliath. We saw them in the last battle as well. They did very well. Gondor were on the back foot for the most part by the time the veterans actually got into melee and got a chance to use their locked morale, so it wasn't enough to bring Gondor's victory to them. But they're here once again, and they can be very, very useful. Good line infantry in melee, but also very, very solid at range, and that locked morale does make a big difference, especially against the scary Haradrim units. Pelagia Marines. Javelins is an area where Harad will clearly have an edge over the Gondorians, but the Pelagia Marines are just a fine javelin unit really, and they can actually perform decently well in melee, again as we saw in the last battle replay actually. They are lighter infantry, so don't expect them to work miracles, but they're not defenceless in melee in the same way that some other skirmishers of this kind are. Trollshore axe throwers come immediately to mind, they're a bit fragile, but yes, we shall see how well they do. Citadel Guard, fantastic for holding a line, armour piercing damage, which won't be as useful against Harad. It will still be useful against some of their units like the Serpent Guard, especially with armour upgrades. But for the most part, the Citadel Guard are going to be here for their more defensive characteristics. Very tough to burn down quickly, and very good morale. Just good stats all around. Harad have got all the armour piercing they need to be effective against Gondor, though. It's one of those really interesting matchups where both sides have got good elements of their armies against one another. I would say when Harad are on the defence, though, the battle does slightly favour them, because Gondor have a harder time using their skirmishers to their advantage, which is their main edge over the Haradrim, but we'll see. Gondor infantry with the armour upgrades, they make a decent front line. Harad, like I said, have got all of the armour piercing to be effective against this kind of unit, but with this many of them, they will at the very least be able to really easily overpower the entry-level Haradrim units, depending on how many of them there are. As it is a 4v4, Harad will be leaning into those kind of units a little bit more so that is an area where Gondor can have a bit of an edge. Gondor Spearman, a similar story, only less useful at killing off infantry, but they are more defensive in nature, and if there are Haradrim cavalry on the field, they will be good at counteracting them. More Gondor infantry over there. Upgraded Axemen of Lasarnak, once again, more here for the attack that they offer, more so than the armour piercing. There are only a few Haradrim units, like I said, that really have armour enough that armour piercing is really desirable. But still, Axemen of Lasarnak are here, and with the armour upgrade they are pretty bulky as well, at least among Axemen of this type. And then polearms, another area where Gondor can perhaps put the screws to Harad a little bit. The Fountain Guard, once again, the armor piercing may not be quite as useful as it would be against other factions, but the fact is, on the front line, Harad will still struggle quite a lot to deal with Fountain Guard like this. I'll have to get trollmen in and amongst them perhaps, or pepper them up with javelins before they actually arrive to the front line. Guards of Osgiliath, very similar story, albeit they're not quite as effective at dealing damage, but they do have that long phalanx that pikes are known for, but this will mean that they're even more vulnerable to units getting in and amongst them, as trollmen will tear through them if you allow that to happen. A trebuchet, interesting settlement for a trebuchet, we shall have to see how effective it is. And also Vanguard of King Elisar, so once again we see a unit which was consigned to the scrap heap of history, but it makes a return in a scenario once again, and should be quite effective against Harad actually. Heavy swordsmen generally are. So we'll go through the other armies a little bit more quickly, seeing as, unless we come across a new unit that we haven't seen as of yet. Frodor Baggin has got plenty of Gondor infantry on the front line as well, so all about those numbers. The rank and file Gondorians, solid if not spectacular, but with this many of them you can keep an assault going for a good long time. Gondor Spearman in behind them in force as well. Axemen of Lasarnak, plenty of them actually, so good damage. This is a unit that should be very effective against the Haradrim if used at the right time. The Ravenhelms of Caer Andros, heavy swordsmen trading in that armour piercing for higher base damage, which is exactly what you want against the more lightly armoured denizens of the south. So there they are, we'll see how well they get used. He's got some more polearms, Fountain Guard, Guards of Osgiliath, but also I do spy over here the Nimlothian Honour Guard. My personal favourite Gondorian bodyguard unit, albeit on this occasion you could say they're less effective because that armour-piercing spear aspect to them is what really sets them apart. And you could say that certainly the Vanguard of King Elisar, but also the Wardens of the White Tower might be better against Harad when they're dug in like this. But still they should be very, very effective, should they get into melee against most things. Citadel Guard and Pelagia Marines as well. Moving over to the third Gondorian army, played by Mevin, Gondor Archers, so once again they'll be able to put some pressure on from range. Just a full line of them, several units of Gondor infantry in behind also, very similar layout with the Axemen of Lasarnak in behind the rank and file. Fountain Guard, Guards of Osgiliath, Pelagia Marines, Ravenhelms also, and the first example just in front of more Citadel Guard on the field we see today of the Wardens of the White Tower, so like I said, should be pretty decent against a lot of the Haradrim units. They will still be overpowered by the likes of the Champions of Nafarat, of course, but they should be fairly efficient against a lot of the regular Haradrim units. And we shall have to wait and see how well they do. And then finally, the final Gondorian army, played by Froggy. He's got some Guards of Osgiliath, another Trebuchet with Fountain Guard all in and around them, Pelagia Marines, more Gondor infantry, Gondor Archers here in force, as well as some Gondor Spearmen also. Surely there's some hidden units around here as well. Haven't seen any Athelian Rangers, but then we wouldn't be able to because they can hide anywhere, so I would imagine they're probably going to show at least one of those units popping up somewhere. And that may very well be Froggy. So, we now move on to the Haradrim Defenders, starting off with Lango. Several units of Haradrim Archers. With a 4v4 siege, you can always imagine the Defenders are going to have lower quality armies in general. Having to lean on your militia skirmishers like this could be a potential issue as the battle wears on. But we shall see. The Haradrim Archers, if they get into a good position, can still be a real annoyance for them as they move forward. Hashari, positioning will be everything for them. If they can use their throwing projectiles, they'll do a good amount of damage, and then in melee, of course, they can also do a good job. They are quite fragile, so you will need to support them with the appropriate units, but if you use them well here, they could be a real game changer for you. Upgraded Dismounted Serpent Guard, so the Gondorian armour piercing will be most useful against a unit like this, which is what gives Harad their bulk on the front line more than anything else. Having said that, they're still not as reliant on their armour as many other human kingdoms line infantry units are, and they have a decent amount of melee defence to go along with this, but we'll see. It's one of those interesting points. It does also mean the archers will be slightly more effective against a unit like this than they otherwise would be. Trollmen, the armour piercing will be absolutely vital against Gondor. The Trollmen units in general are very popular for Harad for good reason, and especially against Gondor, they will be key to Harad's success or failure. Southron Archers a little bit better than the Haradrim Archers in front, but they're still nothing special. The standard Gondor Archers with the upgrades will still be able to defeat them fairly easily in a fair skirmish fight, but being that this is a siege, it will probably not be fair for the Gondorians, and the Haradrim should be able to take up a good position. Southron Pikemen are armour piercing as well, but their stats are very low, so you have to support them properly, but if you do, they can be a very efficient unit. We shall have to wait and see how that works out. Champions of Nafarats, really strong bodyguard unit, especially against the likes of Gondor. And 2 units of the Serpent's Fangs. The Poison Arrows might come in handy as the battle wears on. They're also very solid in melee. Really the one Haradrim skirmisher at long range that can do a lot of damage quickly. Mr. Sneakman has got some Trollmen of Harad. He's also got a catapult, potentially good for sniping out those Gondorian trebuchets as they move forward. Southron archers once again, Haradrim archers once again, a large amount of dismounted Serpent Guard with the upgrades, a couple of units of Hashari, some Southron pikemen, a few units of them. Southron Warband, potentially an efficient little unit this. They're pretty fragile with their wicker armour and shields, but they're still armour piercing in melee, like I said, so it's one of those little aspects which can make these units much more useful than they otherwise would be against certain opposition. More Trollmen and more Serpent's Fangs. And finally, on the outside of the settlement, we have Viper Action, who has got some Trollmen of Harad. A lineup of skirmishers once again with the Southron Archers. Hashari are over here. None of the Hashari Shadows. Actually, no, yes, there are the Hashari Stalkers, so there are some rangers on the field today. A little bit worried about how the frame rate drops whenever I look towards the town, but let's hope that comes to nothing in the end. Southron Pikemen, Haradrim Spearmen, upgraded Serpent Guard, and there may very well be a few other units hidden amongst this mass. And then finally we have Eclipse himself, who sent me the battle replay, so big thank you to him. Haradrim Spearmen, Champions of Nafarats, Serpent's Fangs. As we move a little bit further forward, we have some Hashari, we have some Demons of the Desert, who could be so effective if they're put into the right position here. Not too many units of them though, which I like. It means Harad can't use them as a crutch on this occasion. Southron Warband, dismounted Serpent Guard, and I would imagine it's going to be fairly similar as we look through the rest of the army. Southron Archers, some Trollmen, Haradrim Archers, Serpent Guard, so yeah, you know what to expect at this point. More Serpent Guard and more Southrons and Haradrim. So, I will make a little cut and we will rejoin when the battle is about to begin. So perhaps not quite as big a gap as I was actually expecting here, as the Haradrim archers are going to start opening up on Frodor Baggins' initial expeditionary force moving towards the front of the city. But Gondor will be well placed to deal with this. I'm actually quite surprised he sent up his Ravenhelms this early. I'm always a big advocate, really, of sending forward a bit of quality to assist your initial assaulting force, but I think the Ravenhelms, because they are unshielded, well armoured though they may be, it's not the sort of unit you want to be sending into the Lion's Jaws just yet. I think I would have sent the Citadel Guard up, actually, especially seeing as the initial front lines here are being made up of the dismounted Serpent Guard, where that armour piercing will be at its most useful. Potentially, though, Gondor could be able to crash through here with a bit of brute force fairly quickly. It's only a thin line of dismounted Serpent Guard that is ready to receive this. You can see there as well, a bit of action coming forth from the Trebuchet, a good hit through the middle of those lines there. Southron Pikemen and dismounted Serpent Guard taking a bit of damage, but Morris being a little bit more cautious perhaps than his ally over here, who sees a bit of an opportunity to try and smash through this thin front line pretty quickly. But there are more Serpent Guardsmen closing in as we speak. As the armoured ranks of Gondor do get into this front line, they will need a little bit of support, especially actually as those Ravenhelms consider moving into action, because they will be pretty good against these dismounted Serpent Guard. They've taken a bit of damage on the way forward, but nothing too severe. When you're talking about basic archers that are shooting at them, their armour is good enough to shrug off a good amount of that damage, like I said, but I think I still would have preferred to see the Citadel Guard move forward first, save the Ravenhelms for a little bit later, but you could also say that then you're just letting the Javelins for later on feast upon the Ravenhelms. As long as you've got a little bit of quality, I suppose it's not too important how you decide to go about your business. Meanwhile, still over here, Morris waiting for his opportunity. Javelins being used on the front line, which I actually quite like. The Pelagia Marines softening up this front line for attack, but that is also going to allow the Southron archers to shoot into them guilt-free. One of the lighter Gondorian units as well, shielded though they may be. Mevon approaching the outer limits of the city. And now you can also see Viper Action ready to attack. That's actually a very fortuitous hit there, right into the middle of this dismounted Serpent Guard. There's also a little bit of Trollman action going on in here, so a good choice of target, even though they are in loose formation. The units are high quality enough that you do want to be going after them if you can. A bit of a interesting little building there, built into the lake. And you can see now as well, Mevon is going to be moving up. This frontal area is going to be attacked by 3 armies, essentially. So I'd imagine Froggy is going to be a little bit more cautious, wait a little bit longer, so that he can join up with the other 3 armies as they move forward. Gondor archers and Gondor infantry pouring forwards, being aggressive. It's not the most organised advance, but considering that Harad weren't entirely ready for this sort of thing, you can understand why. You can also see up there, however, Southron archers in a very good position to capitalise on Gondor as they push through this area. This is where Gondor do come into their own a little bit though, that heavy armour, the focus on shielded infantry they have as well for the most part, will help them when shrugging off the damage from more basic archers like the Southrons and the Haradrim archers they will be fighting today. Gondor infantry going through the dismounted Serpent Guard. Haradrim archers being caught out in melee as well. They almost certainly haven't used up all their ammunition, so this is a bit of a mistake. The Gondor infantry will easily be able to pick their way through them. Over here though, Harad have really fortified this front line quite nicely. Those Ravenhelms getting hit in the back by those Haradrim archers as well. There are still good blobs of these Gondorian fighters trying to do their thing. But there are going to be more needed, and Frodor Baggin is going to send forward some more Gondor infantry. Being very aggressive, which is interesting to see. I mean, this is a long battle, so I was kind of ready, steeling myself really, for a battle where it was a bit standoffish at the start, but not a bit of it. All of the Gondorian armies are pressurising the Harad front lines. Harad are not going to allow them to just run roughshod over them either. Plenty of arrows being traded back and forth. The Southron archers, this is where Harad will struggle a little bit, especially in these more open areas. It is interesting that Lango has decided to defend this more open area, because this is where Gondor's archers can be used to greater effect. Not a lot of cover over here to mitigate the damage from that Gondor firing line. And the Southron pikemen, armour-piercing though they may be, the sheer weight of the Gondor line, as well as the support coming in from those javelins to soften this front line up, is having the desired effect from a Gondorian point of view. Gondor Spearman and infantry are moving forwards as well. Frodor Baggin, again, he's got to be a little bit careful because his line is wavering in certain places, so he needs to make sure that he keeps this assault going. Lots more reinforcements coming forward from Mr. Sneakman though, just having a look down that main road that goes through the town, akin to the Champs-Élysées. No arch at the end though, but plenty of reinforcements coming forward from Mr. Sneakman, which is bad news for Frodor Baggin. It means he's going to have to continue to throw himself against that brick wall and hope that Mevin and Morris can maybe break through in their areas in time, that he still has an army remaining at the end, but such is the way of things here. Citadel Guard moving forward will be really useful against those Serpent Guard, and to be fair, Mevin is making really good progress here. Those Haradrim archers are going to have to run away, so Mr. Sneakman's reinforcements all of a sudden are going to be very, very necessary. The Serpent Guard being pulled off the front line here, and they are wavering as a result, so good news for Frodor Baggin. He has gotten what he wanted. Mevin's army is going to be able to come to his aid, and that means he can get away with throwing even more men forward, and he should be able to do some good things there. Meanwhile, the Gondorians and the Haradrim continuing to pelt one another with projectiles over here. Froggy's doing exactly the right thing by not just charging into this situation, because he effectively is attacking a different section of the city entirely. It's almost like the second layer on this half of the city that he's having to deal with. So I can definitely understand why he is being a little bit slower about his approach, because if it goes wrong for him, he doesn't have another army nearby that can come to his aid to give him a bit of a hand. So I think he's going about things in the right way over here. Meanwhile, they have essentially pulled back off this front line very quickly, having seen that Mevin was making good progress. Big strides through the city. Morris will be able to move in and secure this more open area, the lower section of the city. Frodor Baggin, despite the initial damage he took, his Gondorian fighting force is still in good condition. Serpent Guard being slain, broken and fighting to the death. There's actually some Haradrim archers that are suffering the same fate as well, so that's a good catch. 70 archers as the battle goes on could be enough to make a big difference, you never know. So taking down as many of these as you can is going to be important as Gondor continue to aggressively push in. Try and seize as much territory as they can and force Harad onto the back foot, but they're only going to be able to carry that so far before it becomes too reckless to continue. And now these Southron archers are also going to leave their current position. They will have gotten a decent amount of kills as well, but Gondor, based on the angle of their hits, a lot of the shields would have been coming into play, and then there's just the straight up armour values that Gondor have as well. But there are plenty of other choke points that Harad can take up in the city. The first assault, I have to say, Gondor handled themselves pretty well there. They managed to combine nicely. The player who was a little bit more isolated didn't make the mistake of just charging head first into a situation he wasn't going to win. There is also a little way through over here, so actually technically Mevin could come to Froggy's aid. And that is interesting, although to be fair, Viper Action has got enough on the front line here that Mevin isn't going to be able to get away with lowballing it in the way that he currently is. One unit of Gondor infantry isn't going to be enough to smash your way through light armour piercing spears and a good quality upgraded line infantry. Southron archers also in support, so if he is serious about pushing through here, he's going to need to push up more units, but he has got more on the way, and this has also given Froggy the confidence he needs to move in, albeit that is a pretty disastrous entry into his infantry assault. Over 100 Gondor infantrymen routing. I would assume that came about as a result of being charged by the Serpent Guard and being given a volley in the face by those Hashari armour-piercing throwing daggers, and the Gondor infantry struggling. All of these Southron units, again, lower quality, not very durable, but that armour-piercing bite they had, useful against the Gondorians. There's some Gondor archers who might be out of ammo as well, but they're not going to offer too much in terms of damage to the front line, you would have to say. But the crimson-red line of Harad holding firm against the silvered steel of Gondor. For now. Neither side will be too displeased with how it's gone so far. I think Gondor will probably be slightly the happier at the moment, considering how well they were able to push their way through this section. And they're continuing to chase Harad down as well, with Morris getting into a good position here. Archers firing away, getting into a skirmish fight potentially with the Haradrim archers, veterans of Osgiliath. Yeah, this is a fight where the Gondorians will be quite happy. You can see a few of the Gondor archers falling by the wayside there, but almost the entirety of the front ranks of this Haradrim archer unit dying. The one thing that they do have at their disposal, though, is superior terrain, so they won't be as outclassed as they otherwise would be, and Harad will be fine with taking this fight. It means they won't have to deal with this ammunition on more important targets later. Serpent's Fangs, meanwhile, are a bit of a different proposition. They are much more able to go toe-to-toe with the Gondorian archers, and also they can reduce the morale of the infantry units that are getting maybe a little bit too far ahead of their support. We could see that. There's Hashari stalkers up on that cliff as well, so potentially a bit of a dicey situation for Morris. Frodor Baggin has got a fair amount of his army still outside of the settlement. He needs to move these boys forward. The time for caution has passed. You need to make sure that your infantry is in a good enough position to capitalise on anything that you perceive. Citadel Guard going to get into melee here. Start poking with that armour-piercing damage. Gondor infantry backing them up. If they can get into a nice clean engagement here with Harad, could start to go pretty well for them, but the Trollmen will turn that around very quickly. Fountain Guard getting pelted as well by those Serpent's Fangs. Not really a damage-focused archer, the Serpent's Fangs. They're bulky, and they're more designed with those poison arrows in mind, but when you're talking about going after unshielded units, that's exactly the sort of thing you're going to want to see. Mevin seems to have doubled back now and is going to try and go through this area almost exclusively. Gondor infantry are there, Gondor archers firing point blank into the Southron pikemen. They'll do a decent amount of damage there. Very, very fragile, relatively speaking. And then over here, Froggy's assault is still going, so it wasn't thrown off entirely, and he has slowed things down a little bit, perhaps seeing that that was a bit foolhardy before, trying to push through the lines. I can appreciate it, but when you're talking about a faction that's capable of doing damage quickly like Harad, sometimes a bit of caution is warranted, and he is firing into the Trollmen. They are shielded from the front. They don't have the best armour, but from the front with the shield, their second hit point, it'll take a little while before you actually start to kill these Trollmen. But to be fair, I think this is a decent target to go after, because as soon as their hit points are gone, they aren't the most skilled unit in melee. They're more of a Berserker class unit, really, where they're reliant on their hit points to keep them alive, so potentially good things there. Southron archers, the only Southron unit that aren't armour-piercing in melee, being pushed forward. They're not going to do very well against Gondor infantry in melee, clearly, but Viper action just trying to get in the way of Mevin in this very narrow choke point. Frodor Baggin moving forward some depleted units, but you can see that there's not a lot down there. I'm a little bit surprised that he's not being more aggressive, considering how aggressive he was right from the outset. Or he could also get away with sending forward some support to try and help Morris out as he tries to smoke Lango away from these defensive positions. Some of the Fountain Guard did make it to the front line, as did the Citadel Guard. The Trollmen are really propping up this Haradrim defence. I don't know whether it'll be enough for them in the end, because it's a lot of heavy-duty Gondorians there, but we'll see. Harad will try and do their business by out-damaging Gondor. Really is what will come out on top here, an offensive philosophy or a defensive one. Ironically, those on the attack are the ones with the defensive philosophy, and vice versa. Champions of Nafarat being committed to melee is a big statement by Lango this early in the fight. It means he's very eager to keep this front line under control. The Citadel Guard will start to struggle. There are plenty of arrows coming forth as well from those Haradrim archers up on the cliffs over there. Not the most accurate unit in the world, but they are still hitting, albeit into the front of heavily armoured Gondor units. But any sort of support, I'm sure, would be appreciated by the Haradrim warriors on the front line. And there goes a Gondorian general. I would assume that was Morris's general, because it was this fight over here in which that took place, which is a real problem for Morris, because it means a lot of his rank and file units will start to feel the heat, especially going up against a unit like the Trollman, and we could start to see routing on the front line unless reinforcements are forthcoming. But fortunately, he is right on top of that. He's getting some Marines and some more infantry forwards, and some Gondor archers. These Serpent's Fangs, though, not huge piles of bodies, but they would have been doing damage against some important targets, so good choices being made. Frodor Baggin is now moving forward, lagging hit behind his allies a little bit in terms of the continued assault, but he is now getting some infantry forward. And there is only a unit of depleted Serpent Guard on station immediately, but there are plenty of other units that he can use, hiding behind the cliffs to prevent being skirmished down. Which of course is what Gondor will be trying to do throughout this battle, trying to pull Harad out into the open, use their archers to good effect. But this assault has completely come to an end, which is always a bad sign when you're the attackers. Viper Action will be very pleased that his Haradrim warriors, despite being poked and prodded by the archers early on, he held his ground, and the infantry assault did not go too well for Gondor over here, at least to start with. And this very narrow choke point that Mevin is having to try and make his way through is tough. Eventually Viper Action will have to retreat, I think, because he won't be able to withstand a full-blooded assault from two Gondorian armies, especially not if he's plugging up holes with nothing but these Southrons here. But having said that, doing a decent job of it for the time being, and I think he can get away with it for a little bit longer, even if Gondor are starting to push in with a little bit more venom now. Is Froggy going to reignite his assaults? He's just waiting for the time being. Fountain Guard are there. Southron archers. He needs to make a decision fairly quickly, I think, because the longer he leaves some of his more important units in the open like this, these Southron archers are going to kill off more and more of these Fountain Guard. Very important in a 4v4 like this that Harad take down those high quality attacking units as best they are able, because they won't be able to rely on that late on in the way that you can in a 5v3. If it's reasonably even going into the late game in a 5v3, the defenders are going to have the quality edge. In a 4v4 it will be the opposite way round, so you definitely need to make statements like that throughout the battle. Serpent Guard being backed up by some more Southrons, including some pikes, but the quality of the Gondorians here are doing okay for themselves for now. That armour piercing should be coming to effect, but it's actually over here down in the lower sections of the city as we head over the smelters. Gondor have managed to push through. I think Harad are pulling back once again, not wanting to hold on to two choke points. So in the end, Gondor lost their general. They have taken damage as they've moved through here, but victorious once again, Morris. We shall see if he's able to do that for a third time now. I'm not sure. Eclipse has got some support over here. You can see that plenty of ways through this settlement. So quite a well-designed city this. There's plenty of routes you can take through to meet up with your allies later on. Plenty of areas for the defenders to cover, but also good positions for them to take up to do damage to the attackers on the way through. It's a big city, which is why I think it is probably best designed for a 4v4, because I think you do need 4 defending armies when you have a big city like this to really take advantage of how big the settlements are. That Citadel Guard getting far too far ahead of themselves, and Trollmen and Southrons jumping on them immediately. Morris will need to be a little bit more careful. He doesn't have infinite manpower here, unless Frodor will send over a couple of units to support him. Nice little docks here, I like that. Always good to see new maps like this. And then over here again we can see Frodor Baggin making steady progress. He will need to make quicker progress if Morris's army does start to fall apart at the seams, but for the time being this is fine. Ooh, and there's damage coming from overhead as well. Southron archers taking up a good position here on the hill. This is the benefit to being the defenders. There's often really nice areas you can use to use your skirmishers for, and so far the Haradrim and Southron archers in particular have been used pretty well by the defenders, and they will need to continue to do so because volume of fire is everything for them. It's not enough to get 1 or 2 good volleys with them because the damage simply isn't high enough. Let's have a little look over here. Gondor making slow progress, but this is enough for Viper Action to commit forward a unit of Trollmen. Perhaps he's going to pull back now though, because there is a gap that those Pelagia Marines are using to get some good damage in. And over here Froggy's infantry assault has restarted. Pelagia Marines Potentially out of ammo being committed forward, Gondor archers, so trying to get away with a mostly out of ammo skirmisher assault on this front line. I'm not sure how effective that's going to be necessarily. Need a bit of quality infantry in there as well. Gondor Spearman are infantry at the very least, but again, I can understand why at this point there's not a lot of reinforcements directly in behind this, so I would actually be a little bit more aggressive at this point if I were Froggy. Then you and Mevin can start to clean up this section of the city a little bit more quickly. Mevin, there's only so much he can do with the choke point as narrow as the one that he's having to deal with, and he is committing quality in there, so... Ooh, and bridges are always an interesting thing. We'll see how well Gondor can traverse those. There are still a few units that could potentially get themselves cut off, though, these Southron archers. Still with a bit of ammunition. Perhaps it's their hope to just sideswipe the Gondorians as they move forward and fight to the bitter end that way. Meanwhile, are they going to try and skirmish with the Haradrim, Morris? It's how he's opened up both of his previous assaults, and it is a tried and tested method that the Gondorians like to use. Veterans of Osgiliath still healthy as well, so it goes to show how tanky they are. They're not multiple HP, but they're one of those units where it's about as close as you can be. And you can see Haradrim archers, they don't have a shielded unit on hand to cover their pikemen actually, so they're just using an out of ammo Haradrim archer unit. I like that creativity from Lango. It's a unit he doesn't really care too much about, so he's just going to get them in the way of his pikes, which will be far more useful for him. Of course, a few of those arrows will still hit the pikemen, but it's better than just leaving the pikes out in the open. And he doesn't want to fall too far back, because otherwise the entire Gondor force could just focus on this choke point instead. So, interesting little situation there. Trying to skirmish for the time being. As we go back to the middle to see what sort of progress Frodor is making. No progress in terms of ground made. And indeed, at this point, Harad are turning the tables on him a little bit, with some trollmen of Harad being committed to the front line. And that is going to be some big armour-piercing damage coming Gondor's way, which means Gondor will have to respond in kind with a bit of support, and they're going to do so with a ranged unit. Pelagia Marines, will they have a good enough angle to use their javelins? I'm not sure. I mean, the Southron pikemen moving forward as well. That could be a good target. You're going to do a lot of damage to them quite quickly. Southron pikemen's fatigue will also go down fairly fast. No, they're going to go for the front line. They don't really have the positioning. We'll see how well that treats them later. But Gondor have pushed forward now. Looks like Mevin has managed to smash through the line. Froggy's still held up by a thin line of Haradrim resistance. Southron archers that have been left behind are being broken in by Mevin. So Mevin so far has done quite well at supporting two of his allies as they got held up in quite a nasty front line. So that's good teamwork from Gondor. Froggy would have made his way through here eventually anyway, but you really do need to hasten your way through, be as efficient as possible in this kind of fight. And with some Gondor infantry coming in from behind, I would imagine this Haradrim force is probably going to break pretty quickly. Gondor archers. Let's see here. Still skirmishing going on, and still the Veterans of Osgiliath picking and choosing. Deciding to use more of the trebuchet now. Going after the Southron pikemen. The Serpent's Fangs are shooting into the Veterans of Osgiliath in response, but you can see, even though the Serpent's Fangs, like I said, they're not a damage-focused archer as such, but consistent fire will still do a lot of damage to several units. But the Veterans of Osgiliath, only a few of them fall by the wayside. That armour really paying dividends. The trebuchet being used now to try and crack through, but again, being used on cheaper units like this, Harad will be fairly pleased with that. Morris has really got two choices though. He can either use his artillery and his archers, dump all the ammunition now to soften Harad up and then attack, or he can just attack now and try and save some ammunition for later. Froggy does still have his trebuchet, so I would suggest he might be better off just dumping his ammunition in here. Lango's position has held on pretty well, and he has got a bit of support from Clips now as well, so that is worth bearing in mind. This street still being held up. Nimlothi and Honor Guard committed to the front line, so he has responded with more quality. The Ravenhounds will be really, really good as well against the lower end Southron units that they're having to deal with. Very, very nice. This is a good battle so far. I'm enjoying this one. I always like themed battles like this. And then over here, yeah, this unit of Southrons that was left behind being dealt with by Axemen of the Sarnak, but more Southron archers being used to good effect. That's what Harad have been really good at in this fight so far. Taking up good positions, laying little traps, as it were, for Gondor so they can use their lower end skirmishers as efficiently as possible. Because they know if it comes down to just pure grit in the late game, Gondor will probably have the quality to win that fight. But if they can really wear Gondor down piece by piece with their basic skirmishers, stuff like the Harad javelins in the late game in particular could be a real game changer. But now Gondor taking up some vantage points of their own, potentially able to use the Harad city against them. These Gondor archers are a little bit beat up at this point, but every little helps for the Gondorians. Let's have a little look at what's going on over here. Potentially a bit of a melee. Again, Citadel Guard, they're going to need more support. They will get it. So yeah, this is going to be it. Morris throwing everything forward. I like this though. Morris has, when he's committed, he's gone all in with his commitments, and that was a really good hit there from the Trebuchet right into those Trollmen. The most dangerous unit for the Gondorians to have to contend with by far. Another good hit as well. Some Serpent's Fangs in there for good measure. So I like this. I think he's chosen the right time. There's always an element of luck with artillery, but you have to be in it to win it. And you have to actually use the artillery for it to be able to do its damage, potentially. I mean, these Trollmen will do a lot of damage here to these heavily armoured Gondorians. Those Southrons as well. They're doing their best here, the Southron pikemen, but you can really see that armour piercing is not the only thing that's important. The low stats do make an impact, and it's a big difference between them and something like the 1st Legion from Khazad-dûm, for example. But the Gondorians here in numbers. Going to charge forward. Veterans of Osgiliath out of ammunition by the looks of things, but they have got a lot to offer in melee as well. They'll keep this assault going for a good long time. Harad have got decisions to make as well. When you see an attack coming forward like this, you have to commit something serious to keep them at bay. If you don't, you could end up being in a bit of trouble. But Harad do seem to want to hold on to this, so fair play to them. Meanwhile, over here, it's always an interesting situation when you have to cross bridges, but fortunately the Pathfinding Medieval 2 won't have a choice but to go across the bridges because it's the only way. Gondor archers from Froggy, so again he's using his skirmishers as a bit of a screen to prevent the initial damage being done. Southron Warband will stand in the way, who will be able to defeat depleted Gondor archers fairly comfortably. Bit of support coming in from those skirmishers, Mevin getting his Gondor archers into position, and this is where Gondor can make their skirmishers work for them, which is a little bit of a concern, I'd have to say, for Harad, especially if they see those Demons of the Desert. Interesting to see Eclipse move them into this position, because they will almost certainly attract the full attention of those Gondorian archers up on that high ground. The Haradrim archers going to try and do the business here. I'm a little bit surprised that they came over here in the first place. Are they going to try and get over there? Are they going to try and perhaps do the damage to the attack going through the middle here from Frodor Baggin? Pelagia Marines firing their javelins up onto the cliff. Look at those swords dancing around all over the place. It's quite a funky glitch that the Hashari have got going on. This is a really interesting fight, though. Not a lot of ground has been made by either side, so Harad will be quite happy with that, but there is also a certain inevitability of Gondor's victory, so Gondor won't be too displeased with how this fight is going. Like I said, in battles like this where it comes down to just blunt force and melee, without the Trollman, Harad will be exposed a little bit by the superior survivability of Gondor, you would think. Over here, Gondor archers once again being used as a screen, some Gondor spears moving forward. The Southron Warband will be quite happy with this fight so far. And over here, Champions of Nafarat from Mr. Sneakman being moved forward. Breaking and fighting to the death is a little bit of a concern for Morris here. With Mr. Sneakman and Eclipse backing Lango up, and he doesn't have any backup from his allies, it could be that this Gondorian force does falter, and that will be a real concern for them. They're going to have, and they will be using their trebuchet. Are they going after those Hashari? I think they have to just hit the front line right in front of them, if they are able to. All of those skirmishers up on the high ground, Gondor, more resilient than most factions in this kind of situation, but they're still taking damage here. And there is more Trollmen over on this side of the field than there has been in the melee engagements elsewhere. Bad news for Morris. Bad news bears. And even just the basic skirmishers here are going to be shooting into the back of this front line, so the armour will be coming into effect, but any shielded units will not be getting the benefit of that. You can see the guards of Osgiliath are really struggling here. Will he use that trebuchet? There's more Axemen of Lasarnak. Does he have reinforcements? He does, but it's few and far between, and a lot of it now is Axemen of Lasarnak, so they will suffer the same fate really. They're going to try and squeeze around the side. So that's good from Morris. He's not going quietly into that good night, but those Axemen of the Sarnak are taking a lot of damage here. But they do need to try and silence some of these archers, because they're taking so much arrow fire that even that well-made Gondorian plate is not going to be enough. They're going to try and break the front line. I'm not sure that's a great idea, because I think the Axemen will break before them. The poison arrows are coming in, the Trollmen and Champions of Nafarat will do the business here. I mean, they're doing damage here to the Harad front line. Gondor really are going hammer and tongs into this defensive position, but ultimately I think Harad will come out of this fight the better. I like the way Morris handled himself here, but it will only be super useful if his allies make it count, and Frodor Baggin unfortunately did not. This assault also faltering, presumably as a result of the Hashari throwing daggers being utilised to good effect. That there... what is that? Firing in. Athelian Rangers, only 29 of them remaining as well, but still, body-piercing projectiles. Frodor Baggin going to try and soften this front line up before having another go. Viper action over here now also with some more Serpent Guard. More and more it's looking like this section of the city is going to have to carry the day for Gondor. Mevin and Froggy, more of a slow burn over here. More projectiles, a river of Gondor projectiles. Shooting down those Hashari, a good choice. Dangerous projectiles, potentially strong in melee as well if supported, so you may as well go after them. And then over here, Gondor infantry also being committed towards the front line. I really have hurt my shoulder doing something. And there's the Trollman. In support potentially, but I don't know, if I were Harad, I would actually be thinking about retreating from this position. Gondor are getting some good value from their skirmishers. They've got plenty of infantry to keep these assaults going for longer. But it might just be that Harad want to keep the status quo for the time being. Keep things as is. That's a good hit there from the Trebuchet. More damage to Serpent's Fangs and Champions of Nafarat, but the Gondorian infantry force over here lies in tatters. Extra damage is really the best that Morris can hope to do at this point. And hope that his allies can carry the day later on into the fight. These Gondor Spearmen broken and fighting to the death. 3 times with that kind of attack was a bridge too far, clearly, for this Gondor force. They did it twice, but when the real quality for Harad kicked in, a really nasty defensive position this as well. Some good crossfire set up from Harad. Intentionally or not, that was a good move. Let's have a little look. Still the Hashari over here. I'd imagine Frodor's still trying to skirmish with the enemy. He may not have that luxury for too much longer though, otherwise this front line could be fortified too much. Athelian Rangers firing in, I mean they will do a lot of damage to something like the Southron Pikemen in all fairness. So you can't complain too much. Dismounted Serpent Guard. There's some Southron Pikemen as well. It's just a slow burn. It kind of has to be a slow burn for Gondor in a front line like this because bridges can be so awkward, but Gondor infantry really not going to enjoy being in melee against something like Trollman. That huge AP damage that they dish out is going to be real nasty for them. Haradrim archers are there. Mevin sending over some forces actually to, I presume, back up Frodor, who still has a lot of his units out here. They need to move forward into this section of the city because even if you don't want to commit them, you need them to be closer to the action than this. If you do need to rapidly commit reinforcements forward, which may have been the issue with his front line collapsing, albeit I probably wouldn't have recommended committing more units forward if Hashari had a perfect shot. But the point still stands. If you want to commit reinforcements to a front line quickly, you're not going to be able to if a portion of your army is way out there. Especially seeing as it's useful units as well. It is mostly unshielded units, so that is probably why they're still back out there, but there's no point in having them way out there. There isn't. This part of the city is secure, unless Harad wants to counter-attack into you, which would be a bold move. But even then, if Harad do counter-attack into you, you'd be better off having your units ready. Gondor archers continuing to fire. And this is a bit of a saving grace. Mostly in this fight we've seen the Haradrim archers take up really good positions, but Mevin with his Gondor archers here has been able to do some good damage here to Harad. Basic Gondor archers are not going to do damage hugely quickly, but quickly enough. Quickly enough. Gondor archers pushing forwards. There's some Citadel Guard back over there as well. Those trollmen bloodied up, you can see they were on the front line. I'm not sure I'd recommend committing them again, to be honest. Gondor's starting to spill through some gaps here. There's only Haradrim archers on the front line, so it makes a lot of sense that Gondor infantry are starting to look quite dominant on this front line. Some more Haradrim arrows trying to... Haradrim, I should say, not Haradrim. Well, they are going to commit more reinforcements forward, eager to hold on to these bridges. Those trollmen pushing back against those Gondor infantrymen, but all the while they are taking hits from those Gondor archers, especially when they're pointing the wrong way. Those big shields that they wield won't even be coming into effect, and they're going to try and get away with holding the line with cheaper units. So it is a game of efficiency, this, for Harad. Morris still has kind of a force, I suppose. He's still a fixture on the field. Fountain Guard, Axeman of Lasarnak, the vanguard of King Elisar. And he still has his trebuchet as well, but there's nothing that Lango really needs to concern himself with. As long as he just holds his position as is, this force really isn't too much of a problem. But it does mean they have to keep a force over here just to marshal against that, which may be a problem later on when Gondor do start to try and make some gains. Speaking of which, Frodor Baggin has moved forward now once again, trying to smash his way through this middle position once more. There's really only a single unit of dismounted Serpent Guard with some very depleted Southrons and Haradrim in and amongst them, so this time surely Gondor will huff and puff and blow the house down. You would imagine. Southron Pikemen, again they're just going to move forward. Ooh, and Froggy, very fortuitous hit. His trebuchet has been really good with the few hits that it's made, cleaving through that unit of dismounted Serpent Guard in big numbers. He'll be very happy with that hit, and potentially going to help out Frodor's push as well as more reinforcements make their way over to try and block his way. Meanwhile, I suppose Mevin has sent less and less over here, and he is going to be sending the bulk of his army to try and push through the middle now. It is looking that way. He's got a few units over here, including archers, but Froggy, once again, having to take on the role of the slow burner of the attackers across these two bridges. Only one section of the city so far has fallen over on this side. More and more moving forward. Once again, the Hashari getting into position. This, I assume, was the cause of the demise of Frodor's last assault, and they're going to try the method once more. Let's have a little look over here. I mean, there's a lot of Fountain Guard on the front line at this point, as well as a lot of aggressive infantry, some Javelin support coming in from behind as well, from the Gondorians, trying to do some damage to those Trollmen, which is the unit you do want to be going after, because that is the unit that's going to do more damage to you. Another unit of Javelins trying to stop those Hashari from being effective once more. They've got a better angle this time as well, so looking a little bit more like it from a Gondorian perspective, this assault. The Javelins in a good position to support, the front line clearly dominating their fight. And this is the truly great men of Gondor doing their thing. Meanwhile, what's happening over here? Gondor thinking about moving forwards potentially, but backing off, and this is the choice that Morris has to make. He can either stay here and just occupy some units, or he can pull back, go back around, and support his allies. Neither of those choices is wrong, I think. There are benefits to doing both, so it's really up to him. If he wants to be involved in the battle, then you would back up and go around the long way. Of course, in so doing, it's going to be a little while before you actually get into the fight, but still. Warns of Minas Ithil. Armour-piercing arrows being utilised on the dismounted Serpent Guard. Damage being done. Is it enough damage to justify using a valuable skirmisher like that? We'll have to wait and see, I suppose. Time and time again in 5v3s we see the attackers claim the skirmish advantage late on just through sheer numbers. Be interesting to see if the attackers can pace themselves to do that this time. In a 4v4 it's much less a given, but Harad have been using their skirmishers quite a lot in this fight so far. Well, but a lot. Pelagia Marines outnumbered on this bridge front line at this point. So again, another assault could fall by the wayside. It's happened once too often for my tastes from a Gondorian perspective in this fight. When you start to need two hands to count the number of times that it's happening, which they're in danger of that being the case, then you know something's going a little bit wrong. Frodor bagging though. At this point, do Harad have the quality? The Hashari are trying to fire in. I don't think they have the quality to hold this back from the Gondorian army now. They've done well in this straight away in the city, but I'm not sure. Perhaps some choices need to be made. I mean, there is always the possibility that all of these units that were being used to marshal Morris's presence in this side of the city could now retreat and potentially help back that up. But it will take them a little while to get there, by which point I have a feeling the Haradrim front line may have already fallen by the wayside. Too many of these units are lower tier and a lot of them are starting to become shaken. So we shall have to wait and see. That is the clear white projectiles of Rangers. Viper action using his Hashari Stalkers. They're having to thread the needle a little bit, but I mean at this point it might be the best choice. There's a lot of high quality units in there. A few of those arrows will go through the back of their own ranks. I don't know. 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. I don't think you're losing a great deal as Harad by doing that, because you're going to lose that front line anyway, so it might just be a desperation ploy. Gondor archers that are out of ammo pushing forward, and based on their defensive stats alone, they will be enough to bring down Haradrim archers. And over here, some of these Gondor spears, the classic medieval 2 bridge pathfinding, not all of them getting into the front line fight. Haradrim archers being asked to deal with Gondor Spearman as well, which won't really happen, but they're holding the line for a decent amount of time, which is all Harad must have committed these units to the front line for, so they can't be too unimpressed with that. Mevon's Gondor archers have already done a good job up on this high ground. Southfront archers, some dismounted Serpent Guard moving forward. They have supports, but we'll have to wait and see. I mean, it's a big settlement, this. Over here, some Haradrim Spearmen being sent forward. That isn't really the kind of heroes, to be fair. I mean, this front line is victory still in Gondor's favour, but it's looking a little bit less domineering than it was just a moment ago. Frodor can't get away with another failed assault, I'm afraid. Even if they need to just commit everything forward and bludgeon their way through as quickly as possible, that is what is going to have to happen, I'm afraid. Gondor can't afford for an assault that big to falter. Otherwise, Harad will be feeling extremely confident as they move into the latter stages of this fight. Still a long way to go in terms of frames, although I'm not sure whether there's a middle section of this fight where we'll need to make a cut, transitioning into a potential final stand maybe. We shall have to wait and see. I mean, we're more or less halfway through in terms of frames, which is crazy when you think about it. Axemen of Lasarnak trying to offer that little bit of damage on the front line. There's the projectiles of the Rangers once again firing into the front line. Fountain Guard being added. The quality is there for Gondor, but they're just not able to get through quickly enough because of the sheer amount of Southrons that are in front of them. I think someone from the Gondor team at this point needs to take the fight by the scruff of the neck and elect to really be aggressive. Try and... because the longer that this goes on, the longer that they're held at arm's length by Harad, the more likely I think a defending victory is. Surely over here from Froggy is the place to make your play, because they're trying to get away with using out of ammunition archers on the front line. And the more that they do that, the more that you'd have to expect Gondor to push forward. And the Spearmen are now pushing forward. I mean, those Serpent Guard did clean up that unit of Gondor archers for the most part, so more damage done to Gondor, but they will need to get these Serpent Guard out of here as well because they're taking damage. The black projectiles of those Serpent's Fangs shooting in. Not many of those arrows are actually hitting, to be honest, and yes, they're causing the Gondor Spearmen to become shaken, but I'd still back them in this fight against the Southron archers. The Harad unit in melee they're fighting simply won't be scary enough, I don't think. Froggy still has some good units back there, including Vanguard of King Elisar. This is a delicate situation for Harad, though. They do need to make a decision. It's like a layer of defence that may be falling, and then they will need to reevaluate themselves. Oof, that is a good shot there from Morris into the Hashari, doing a lot of damage to them. Cementing Gondor's dominance. I wouldn't risk another shot. That would probably be enough to ensure that stuff like the Fountain Guard continues to be dominant in that particular fight. Southron Archers, it's not the easiest shot for an archer to make. They're going to go for another run at this position as well. Frodor Baggin and Mevon sending over units. They're going to try and succeed potentially where Morris failed. Morris is going to run support for the central assault while Gondor reposition themselves for another attack over here, and it could be enough to send them through this defensive position. I'm not sure whether Lango was ready for this kind of assault, so he is going to have to pull back, possibly to this choke point over here, but that's a little bit wide. This might be a time in the battle where Harad need to think about pulling back in a more wholesale fashion to a better position to defend, because they're not going to last too much longer on this front line. They've lasted longer than I thought they would, to be fair, and taken more Gondorians with them than I thought they would, but ultimately the writing will be on the wall, surely. Don't know though. Southron Archers doing the business. Some regular catapult shots. Not a lot of damage being done. That's a good point actually. This catapult in a little bit of danger of being left behind here. I think Mr. Sneakman now, he might have been hoping to get into a position here to shoot into that front line. He's going to need to get his catapult away. Otherwise he could end up being cut off and caught by the Gondorians. Regular artillery crews are very slow at moving their artillery pieces, and that may be what happens here. Froggy trying to take his time, trying to take it slow. Gondor Spearman slowly but surely bringing these Southron Archers to heel. I mean, to be fair, he doesn't have the disposable units to really throw himself into the breach. Especially because in so doing, he probably would attract the attention of even more arrow fire. So I suppose he doesn't really have too much of a choice, but it will be interesting here. Gondor eventually going to be victorious over here. And I think at this point you can see Harad know what way the wind is blowing, so they're going to retreat some units. And that will be that. There's the Gondorians. Southron Pikemen. I mean, this is Lango's force that has already fought Morris's army 3 times, so it's unsurprising that it's looking a little bit battered and bruised, but still some good units in there. Trollmen variants, Serpent's Fangs. Good stuff. Can they get that catapult away though? Because that could be really, really vital actually. Mr. Sneakman needs to get his catapult out of here. Unless he puts it in a corner and hopes that Gondor forget about it, but that's the sort of target I would be constantly keeping my eye on, because it could be such a good tool for Harad to use in the late game, and he's going to try and go this way. He's also going to turn his Southron Pikemen around. I assume this is to buy a little bit of extra time for his catapult to get by. And if I were to pick between the 2 units, yes, I would pick a catapult over the Southron Pikemen in a siege like this. It has to be done. Are Gondor Spears bloodied up a little bit, but their long fight against the Southron Archers has come to its conclusion. Froggy is there also, so we have a little look over here as well. I mean, this is a big force. It might be the single biggest Gondor force on the field at this point, with Mevon and Frodor moving forward large sections of their army to come up this way. Nothing really over here. Potentially another final stand location that Harad could have used, depending on how the battle went. Little outcropping over there. But not to be on this occasion, not to be. I guess I'll call this one TAL ALJAFF, because that was one of the Haradrim cities used on the campaign maps, wasn't it? Ooh. Trebuchet going to potentially try and get away with the catapult. The catapult will be able to get in behind some other Haradrim fighters. Southron Archers being committed to the melee to stop that catapult from being engaged as Gondor continue to move forward. Vanguard of King Elisar, we see them in melee once again. They were involved in the last battle replay as well, on the one that I dubbed as Tarnost. But we never really saw them, because all the fights they were involved in were blob fights that we couldn't really see them in. And by the time we did see them, they were horribly depleted following Gondor's descent into their loss. Southern Archers being moved forward. What is this catapult going to do? I mean, Froggy's Gondor Spearman is going to move over here. I mean, a real indecisiveness being shown here with what to do with their catapult, and they're in real danger of losing it here. Like, you never want to be like turning your catapult around, because Medieval 2 does that thing where they spin on the spot for about 5 minutes and then they decide to start moving. So they are going to stop the Gondor Spearmen from moving forward. I mean, they've got enough pikemen to hold the Gondor Spearmen at bay, but that's not really the point. I mean, at this point, archers are going to be utilised. I don't know. I think this is it. I think this is it for the catapult. I think they've dropped a bit of a clanger there, the Haradrim, and you can tell. Oh dear, nearly getting friendly fire. You can tell they really want that catapult dead, because at this point, Gondor moving forward, Morris's Axemen of Lasarnak forcing their way through the line, and that's going to be it. That's going to be the Harad catapult toast. Axemen of Lasarnak from behind. They're going to have to try and push through here, surely. This one unit of Gondor spears, Froggy is going to have to hope that they hold up, but the catapult just isn't going to have the speed to get away. And the Axemen of Lasarnak will rip through a catapult crew, especially with a little bit of backup from anything, really. Not what they would have wanted to see at all. There's a few Southron archers in here as well, but they're not going to offer much protection against a unit as deadly as the Axemen that they are facing off against. I do like the Axemen of Lasarnak. Aesthetically, they're a really pleasing unit, heavily armoured axemen. The axes they wield as well are very, very nice. So the catapult crew is going to get away, but without the catapult. And to be honest, if Gondor do let Harad remount that catapult, it will be their failing. Froggy's also going to send a unit of Citadel Guard he had in reserve across the bridges as well to help secure a bit of ground over here. The rest of his army will wait for the time being, because there is a nasty Haradrim skirmish line waiting for them. Southron archers. Haradrim archers as well. Is this going to be the position they use? There's 2 roads up into the final stand that they will have to deal with. And it will be a straight shot to the finish, essentially, at that stage. But, yeah, I mean, at this point, look, they're destroying the catapults as they charge through them. So the saving the catapult crew might be good for nothing other than having a bit of cannon fodder when the time comes in the late game when Harad do have to try and hold back the Gondorian push. And of course, Gondor still have both trebuchets. Morris's has used a fair amount of its ammo, so is Froggy's actually. Trebuchet, not a huge amount of ammunition. But there you go. And there we go, Southron pikemen being finished off, broken and fighting to the death. And the Gondorians will show no mercy to them. No extra defenders can be brooked when they come to make their play for the final positions in this battle. Forward come the Fountain Guard, but I think this is probably going to be where the middle section lull comes into place, because I think the attackers will want to get their ducks in a row before just charging into a well-prepared defence as they try and make their way to the palace at the top of the hill. And that is going to be the end of the Haradrim. So yes, I think that will be, it will now be a cut as we, this is sort of like the midway point of the battle, as it were, maybe a little bit beyond that. But the final phase of the battle will follow this. It might be a long final phase for all I know, it could be a bit of a shortcut indeed. But Haradrim losing their catapult could be a bit of a game changer. That Harad doing pretty well throughout this fight so far, but I'll make a cut and we'll rejoin when the attack is beginning on the final road to the palace. Well, that didn't take long at all, did it really? I kind of figured that would be the case, but in come the Citadel Guard from Froggy, going to engage with some Southron archers immediately, and again Harad using this almost ablative armour technique of throwing in skirmishers that are unimportant to their longer goals to just get in the way of the Gondorian heavy infantry. And there's a lot of Southron archers, and we've seen this be effective so far. There's simply so many of the units like this that it just takes a long time to get through them all. We shall have to wait and see. There are the Haradrim archers, more Southron archers, Serpent's Fangs. There's not a great deal of quality on this front line, you would have to say, from a Haradrim perspective, which may yet come back to haunt them. As we can see, Mevin getting more of his Gondor archers in position. Mevin, of all of the players on display today, has probably had the most luck and the most good judgment, really, with his own skirmishers. And there, Harad, I mean, disrupting the cohesion of this Gondorian front line. Froggy with Gondor Spearman and Citadel Guard should still have enough to beat this Southron archer force, but they'll do a little bit more damage than they otherwise would. But with a bit of support from those Gondor archers, I imagine these Southron archers will fall by the wayside fairly quickly, you would imagine. We shall see. Meanwhile, further up, there's some very depleted units from Frodor Baggin. Morris has got his trebuchet forward. The fine buildings of sandstone and gold throughout the settlement. And look, they're all repositioning themselves here. It'll be interesting to see really how they handle themselves. I mean, that road over there will be defended more vigorously because they know they'll be cut off if they don't defend it, so I can understand the attackers prioritising this little part of the road first and foremost. Gondor archers out of ammunition already actually, but like I said, 1-to-1 they're better than the Southron archers in melee anyway, so they're just going to be here to offer a bit of support. Haradrim archers once again having to be used as efficiently as possible. They may not do the most damage per arrow, but there are quite a lot of them, and this is how Harad are going to have to try and win this battle, as we've seen several times so far. And they're doing a decent job at firing into those Gondorians, but again, that Gondor plate will mitigate a fair amount of that damage. Will it mitigate enough throughout the course of the battle, though, to give the Gondorians the win? Southron archers. Victory seems certain for the Citadel Guard, unsurprisingly given the calibre of opponent they're up against right now. There's a few dismounted Serpent Guard coming in, but in such small numbers that they're really just intent on buying enough time for those Haradrim archers to get as many kills as they possibly can. Before... a lot of these Citadel Guard are actually pointing the wrong way. That should probably be corrected before it yields too many kills. You can see the flickering of the fences in behind those walls. Mevon moving through the settlement. I mean, Gondor still have an army left, but so too do Harad. In fact, let's have a little look at what they have left. I mean, quite a lot of these disposable units, but also still plenty of Trollmen, plenty of Serpent Guard. Lots of their units are depleted at this point, though, which could prove to be an issue for Harad. Some of their units are fully healthy that were kept back for the late game. You can see here as well some Hashari either side of this position. They're already future-proofing, really, as the road to the palace lays open. Gondor potentially going to push up this road as well, with not really anything to stop them. I mean, the Trollmen can sandwich them if they so choose, but just the territory that Gondor could gain here, the map control, could be something that Harad live to regret letting them have. It just depends on whether or not they have a plan in place to commit the infantry quickly. And even if they do, how much longer really are these units going to last? What are they going after, I wonder? The Fountain Guard. Yeah, that makes a good amount of sense. Guards of Osgiliath. Guards of Osgiliath might even be a better target. There's some one Pelagia Marine, which is routing. Need to get out of here a little bit more quickly. There's Froggy's artillery. That trebuchet could yet be a game changer, considering that the catapults will not be playing any further part for Harad, which would have made this very difficult for Gondor if they picked a good place for that artillery, but managing to stop it from making it back was a significant moment in this fight, potentially. It gives Gondor artillery impunity, and with how much ammunition Harad have used throughout this fight already, it could be that the ranged game starts to move squarely in favour of the Gondorians. Those south ones won't last for too much longer, you would imagine. Meanwhile, Gondor do move forward. A few stragglers, first and foremost. The Axemen of Lasarnak will need a little bit of assistance. I mean, the Vanguard of King Elisar are moving in. Morris is the one that's doing this, but he's not got any support coming with him, really, which, again, is a bit of a damning indictment on Mevon and Frodor Baggin. If you see your ally doing this, if you see them taking advantage of a situation, you need to be busting a gut to get over there to help them. Otherwise, things could go horribly wrong for you. Those Southron archers do rout in the face of a unit as strong as the Vanguard. The Vanguard will need to get over here, though, and give a bit of assistance to the Axemen of Lasarnak before they're picked off by the Serpent's Fangs and some angry Trollman. Yet more Southron archers being committed to the front line as well. Men given basic wicker armours and a side sword and being told to take on the trained fighters of Gondor. But, I mean, this is a retreat from Harad at this point. They see the danger that could be befalling a lot of those units, and they're going to try and save them. These Southron archers, again, they have been going up against a lot of spears, it must be said, and the spear malice, meaning that the Southron archers don't die as quickly, has proven to be a bit of an interesting little thing. There are the dismounted Serpent Guard, Haradrim archers. But still, these Trollmen will be good and dominant on the front line as a slew of Haradrim start to retreat further into the settlement. It's becoming more and more of a one choke point fight at this point, as large sieges like this often do. Gondor archers moving in. There's a few routing units as well, so Mevin is now on the front line, helping Maurice's push. Those actions with Sarnak really did pay a hefty price, but more routing from more Southrons, really not built for this kind of combat against this kind of opponent. Fountain Guard, Vanguard of King Elisar, even just basic solid infantry is going to be too much for them to deal with individually, and more brave Southrons do fall. A lot of champions of Nafarats still available though. A bit of damage being done by the artillery of Maurice as well. Probably not a lot of ammunition left on his artillery piece, it must be said, but considering the fact they have another one ready to go. And they still have a decent fighting force here, Gondor, but still, the brave Southrons on the front line continuing to fight. There's a few Serpent Guardsmen in there as well, but there has been, I mean, the Southron archers overall have been the heroes for Harad so far, just because they've been efficient with the damage they can do with their bows. And just in melee, they've held the line longer than you would ever expect them to against the kind of forces they've been up against. And Fountain Guard are having to be committed here to try and close things out. But they're running out of Southron archers at this point, so Harad will be forced to use some of their actual melee units in the higher quantities as we get into the business end of this final defence. It's been a long fight, but it's also been a long fight that's had plenty of content. It wasn't as if there was a really just long, drawn-out and boring skirmish fight at the start. Plenty of stuff going on throughout. Gondor infantry pushing forward in the vanguard. I mean, they'll be very dominant against stuff like Haradrim archers, but there are a few trollmen in there as well, and you can see there another Gondorian warrior does fall away. I don't know where Eclipse's Demons of the Desert went, but I would assume he brought them back here. Took them out of harm's way. They did take a few volleys after all. Those 162 Haradrim archers broken and fighting to the death. I mean, they're a very fragile unit when it comes to this sort of thing, so it shouldn't be too surprising that we're seeing them rout at this point. Maurice's trebuchet getting into position. The crew trying to navigate that low wall. The nemesis of any medieval 2 unit. Victory there. There's a few poison arrows being launched over the buildings. None of them particularly accurately though, so very unlikely to result in any sort of kills really. Might get the odd hit on something like Fountain Guard, but I wouldn't bet too much on that. We'll go up to ×2 speed, seeing as it is now a 1 choke point affair. Vanguard of King Elisar on the front line. More reinforcements needed. If you're going to commit a unit like the Vanguard in, then you're going to need to have some numbers alongside them. So Maurice eager to be the one to push forward. Well, there goes a Haradrim general. Very nasty hits there into this unit of Serpent's Fangs from Lango. So very nice from Maurice. Took a real beating at the hands of Lango earlier on, but still proving to be a useful fixture in his team. The Hashari going to move into close combat. This is the difference now. We're seeing a lot of, I mean, there are still Haradrim archers, but they're broken. But Trollman, Serpent Guard, potentially Hashari as well. Much more of a dangerous foe for the Gondorians to have to try and fight. Javelin still being used though. Point blank hits from the trebuchet again, hitting into the centre mash of those Hashari, but now using rotting meat, so that was the last actual hit they could use from the catapult, and now it will have to be rotting meat. It'd be interesting to see actually who benefits from that rotting meat the most. You would think Gondor, because generally their morale is a little bit higher than the entry level Haradrim, but more and more it's going to come down to Harad's higher tier units, so I'm not sure. And indeed, you can see their Pelagia Marines actually shaken. More reinforcements needed on this front line from Gondor. And there you can see the clear white projectiles, signifying ranger shots, and the Hashari Stalkers, very angry ladies, will be using their arrows here to good effect, which is why perhaps Gondor haven't committed more in. More trollmen on the front line. Again, we're on ×2 speed, because there's only so much I can say about a single choke point fight. And it's really just going to come down to whether Harad can use that support well, whether the damage focus of all their trollmen is going to be enough to deal with the heavy-duty nature of a lot of the Gondorians. The morale situation will be an interesting one. The poison arrows from the Haradrim, the rotting meat from the Gondorians, but also just the straight-up potential for more damaging projectiles from the Froggy's trebuchet as well. That could be a real problem moving into the late game here for Harad, champions of Nafarats. They're trying to dodge that trebuchet, aren't they, and try and get the most out of their archers. Still more reinforcements for Gondor. Harad seems to be a little bit indecisive at this point. More poison arrows being utilised. Fountain Guard being taken off the front line as a result. Is that more rotting meat from Froggy? Could be. It could be that he's just trying to lull them into a false sense of security. And as soon as they blob up on this front line, he switches over to Flaming Shot and deals a potentially mortal blow for them. We'll have to wait and see on that front. Guards of Osgiliath are still alive. Phalanx units, I mean all of this rotting meat. It's going to make using stuff like Haradrim archers and entry-level Haradrim units next to impossible because they'll rout very, very quickly, but Harad aren't really relying on those units as much anymore. That is Wardens of Minas Ithil, who I think were firing at the Hashari Stalkers, who look to be out of ammo anyway, so maybe not the best of targets for them to be going after. And also there you can see Athelian Ranger fire, clear white projectiles thudding into those Serpent's Fangs. Still all sorts. It's hard to sort of differentiate between the poison arrows and the armor-piercing arrows, but the poison arrows have got a broken trail following them, almost like fumes are behind the arrows, whereas with the armor-piercing arrow it's much more of a solid black line that follows them. More units being committed forward, more Gondor archers just to add more numbers to the front line, but already looking like they could rout. Morale playing a big part here in who's going to end up being the dominant force on the front line. Those Haradrim archers broken and fighting to the death, still in the way at the very least, which is all Harad would have wanted of them anyway, so them fighting to the death isn't really the biggest problem. They won't get any kills now, but they were only likely to get 1, possibly 2 anyway, given the difference in quality. Gondor need to try and push forward here, because the longer they're kept at arm's length by Harad, the more... It's not really going to work for Gondor if they just be standoffish this whole time, and at this point the front line is weak enough to the point where they're just going to have to tank some shots from the projectiles. Serpent's Fangs, like I said, I mean they are somewhat damaging, but they're not the most damaging archer that there is. The biggest problem may actually be the morale debuffing effect from those poison arrows at this stage in proceedings. Some Citadel Guard filtering their way through the lines. Serpent's Fangs, 12 of them still alive, getting in the way of the Gondorian advance, blobbing up more Gondorians for more hits. Gondor still have more reinforcements to commit. Fountain Guard, Guards of Osgiliath, units that without any other projectiles to kill them off could prove to be really awkward for Harad to have to try and deal with. They've got support units as well, which will worry them. Froggy's Vanguard of King Elisar taking damage on the approach. Trollmen from Lango. I mean, looking at what Harad have left, do they have Demons of the Desert anywhere? They do. Only 19 of them though. They got savaged on the approach. Another situation where it could have been like the Catapult. They didn't lose all of them, but a good amount of that DPS is gone now. Eclipse a bit foolhardy with them earlier on in the same way as with the Catapult. But they've got quality, but it's not ubiquitous quality at this point, you would have to say. Trying to use those Hashari to good effect. If it comes down to just pure melee slog, then Gondor win this fight at this stage. But they do still have projectiles. Hashari, Demons of the Desert. This is going to be vital. Harad can still win this. It will be difficult, I think. But the more volleys they get like that from those Hashari, the more likely a potential victory can be. More throwing daggers. There's the Trebuchet crew. Gondor trudging their way forwards. more armor-piercing arrows. Armor-piercing not the most useful thing to use against the Hishari, but at this point just killing them off is the most important thing. If you've got a clear shot on them, you may as well take it. Warns Minister Thiel hiding once again. Guards of Osgiliath, Fountain Guard. Those pole arms are going to be vital, I think, to Gondor's efforts pushing forwards. Can they make up for their loss in the last battle? This is going to be closer than the last one regardless. Mordor really pulled away in the last one when they used their numbers and their aggression. This one, I think, Gondor are going to take losses even if they do end up winning this through strength at arms. And if Harad end up winning it, it will be by the skin of their teeth because of good projectile usage here in the late game. Bombarding the Haradrim position with rotting meat. Not a lot of damage done to the buildings of this settlement on this occasion, not like the bombardment we saw from the troll catapults last time out. Gondor infantry, Hashari, with their dancing swords there. You can see the dancing swords. Just as I say, there wasn't a lot of damage done to the buildings. One of the domes, lovingly crafted, gets knocked over. Presumably by rotting meat as well. As you can see, there is a stink cloud with the little flies in and amongst them. And it's just there in midair. Remarkable scenes. Gondor infantry. Axemen of Lasarnak. More of those throwing daggers. Doing damage again. The Axemen of Lasarnak are a damaging unit, so a good target to go after, but will they have enough of these projectiles is another question you would have to ask of the Haradrim at this point, as Gondor continue to push forward with their heavy units. Guards of Osgiliath on the front line will be really useful at trying to keep those damaging trollmen at bay. Phalanx is so useful in this kind of situation. There's still over 10,000 frames left to go in this battle. The Serpent's Fangs are there. Pelagia Marines with a bit of ammunition left, and given that they're throwing uphill, they should have a fairly clear shot, albeit they're throwing right up into the air. Going after the Demons of the Desert though, Eclipse, seeing that this is perhaps the only opportunity, but it's not really a blob at this point. Unfortunately for him, they're just getting focused down. I think with the loss of more of those Demons of the Desert, Harad's last chance potentially may well have just vanished. Says a lot about how resilient Gondor are as a faction that they went through the rest of the settlement with enough strength left in the tank to still have a lot of muscle in the late game. Well judged by the attacks as well so far. Not going to give them the victory just yet, but they're in a good position. Harad don't have that much left. They've got some good stuff, but you can see there they're sort of hiding in these little gardens amongst the fountains. Poison arrows flying overhead. Trollmen continuing to swing away. And Hishari in melee now rather than at range. I mean, their lower armour might be a problem. They're not really designed for blood and thunder engagements such as this, but melee defense could be useful. They're much better when you're using them to flank around and get in behind the enemy so their damage can be complete. More damage being done by those throwing knives. Hishari been used quite well here in the late game. The Demons of the Desert kept at arm's length. More champions of Nafarats engaging in the fight. But Fountain Guard being sent forward as a response. I think the saving grace for Gondor is the fact they have those phalanx units. It's going to make it more difficult for Harad to really start laying down the beating with their trollmen units that they have left. And indeed with the Hishari, which are a damaging enough unit in melee. And again, there go the Demons of the Desert seen. And that is going to be the end of them, surely. Yes, it is. Again, akin to the Witchers with a small unit like that. But the attackers well on top of that, and now they can use their projectiles on other stuff, including the Serpent's Fangs, who are taking a lot of damage there. Trying to use their projectiles as best they can on Athelian Rangers, actually, so that's a good target for the Serpent's Fangs to be targeting. More more units on the way forward. Ravenhelm's a good unit to have in the late game against Harad as well. With less projectiles on the field now, they can focus on doing what they do best, which is laying down a beating with their Zweihanders in melee. Gondor starting to push forward. Champions of Nafarats still doing the business, but it's a matter of quantity at this point. Pelagia Marines will be able to throw the odd javelin in as well. Again, it's not impossible that Harad win, but the problem is they've chosen to engage on the hill, which exposes them to all of the projectiles Gondor still have left, which will do more and more damage to them. Ravenhelm's ready to come in as and when they need to. You can see there that Harad have fallen behind, 2% the difference in favour of the Gondorians. And with the quality of infantry they have left, can you see Gondor surrendering that advantage? Especially seeing as Harad's still going to be reliant on stuff like their Southrons to a certain extent. There's another unit of Champions of Nafarat there, which is significant. 13 of them. Catapult crew. The catapult could have made such a difference here as well. Can they hold on? They're going to try and take up a new position where Gondor's skirmishers can't be used quite as effectively, and that could be a big difference maker. Gondor, let's not forget, are still reliant on stuff like Phalanx units, so if you can take a good engagement against them in terms of shape, you could be onto a winner. And Gondor haven't exactly got that much left in terms of units to commit either. They've got a few more units around there. Citadel Guard, more guards across Gileath, Pelagia Marines, Axel the Sarnak. I mean, a fair few Pelagia Marines. It's not as if they've got anything super high tier left that's healthy. Those Warns of the White Tower, only 7 of them remain. Hashari, defeat is a distinct possibility. Going to try and get in and around them with the Axemen to finish them off and break them. At least I would hope so. Yes, indeed. And that should be that, you would imagine. Now, the true final battle at the summit of the settlement, in front of the palace, the Noble District. Almost all parts of the city have seen action to some extent. Probably that other little final stand is the only place that didn't. Whether it's just through transitioning through it or an actual battle taking place. This has been a really good representation of this map, which will be available in the next patch. I should mention once again. And here the Hashari Stalkers charging in. Getting a good charge there actually into the Citadel Guard, but the Citadel Guard will start to win that fight as it stabilises. Champions of Nafarat coming in once again. Axemen of Sarnak broken actually, so morale-wise that's not great for Gondor. Maybe not, everything needs to be all in at this point from Gondor. Could it be that over-caution that we've seen time and time again, and Frodor Baggin has been the main culprit of that, could that be the difference maker? I mean, the stuff like the Champions of Nafarat could be so strong that they could beast it out for Harad, which would be really unfortunate for Gondor because they played this quite well, but all of those failed assaults earlier in the battle, could they come back to haunt them? Pelagia Marines just run out of ammo, I think, so they will get into melee to be chewed up by the Champions of Nafarat as well. They need to send these units into melee quickly here, they're dawdling. These units over here are doing nothing by just sitting there. You need to get everything in, you need to overwhelm, and Frodor Baggin could be throwing the game away by putting his units back here like this. The pikes are coming in. In fact, I think he may have already thrown the game by doing this. It is really fine margins, and Gondor's front line has been savaged by those Champions of Nafarat. There just wasn't enough bulk on the front line. There goes a Haradrim General, but that's not going to be enough either, I don't think, unless Gondor have got other units that they can commit forward from somewhere. One's a Minisathiel. I mean, they're okay in melee. Do they have projectiles? Oh god, they need to be a melee man. I don't know what you're saving them for at this point. This is it. Surely the whole purpose of saving your units for the late game is so that you can be the hero in this late game situation, not just stand there and watch the battle unfold. Frustrating to say the least. I mean, those Athenian Rangers still have got a bit of ammunition, but it's not going to matter, I don't think. Harad not organised that final push up the hill at all from Gondor, and as a result they may have thrown the battle away.
The enemy general is slain. Let's see how these snakes fight without their head.
Far too stretched, that assault. And unless they can do damage with those projectiles quickly, those Champions of Nafarat have really shown what a domineering force they can be against armour-focused factions. Javelins being utilised on the Serpent's Fangs. The Southron Warband being used as a nice buffer. Numbers, a bit of armour piercing thrown in for good mix, as well as some Southron pikemen in there. Axemen of the Sarnak are not going to be able to out-damage something like the Champions of Nafarat. Javelins being used. It's a very close fight, this. Athelian Rangers. They've got a good shot, but there's only 12 of them, so the DPS on them is going to be limited. Will it be enough to salvage this situation? I mean, these Champions of Nafarat, there's enough Citadel Guard over here to give them pause. They might need a little bit of help, but Serpent's Fangs getting in behind enemy lines. Presumably they're going to try and buckle the formation of the Guards of Osgiliath. I mean, it could be that these projectiles save the bacon of Gondor. But another Harad general falls, but the way they handled that infantry assault up that hill, how stretched it was and how unorganised it was, if they go on to lose this fight, it will be because of that. If they win this fight, it will be because they still had a bit of ammunition left. They still have some javelins left, but the Wards of Minas Ithil at this point out of ammo, so they're going to have to show what they're all about in melee. They are a multiple HP unit, which could be what they need given the calibre of opponents. The Trollmen being the danger that they are. Serpent's Fangs are here in decent numbers. Those Axemen of the Sarnak are fighting bravely, and they need to continue to fight bravely, otherwise Gondor's efforts in this battle are in trouble. Those Champions of Nafarat. I mean, it's because of the Javelins they're losing this fight, which could again be the difference maker. Those Athelian Rangers, Citadel Guard, Gondor going to win over on this side, potentially anyway. 19 Hashari coming over. I think they're going to try and go around the houses to kill off the Rangers first, so that ammunition isn't proving to be such a problem. Serpent's Fangs giving them the business. Is such a close fight, this, isn't it? The fact there's another Champion of Nafarat unit over here, though, I think could be a real problem for the Gondorians. Pelagia Marines are trying to force their way through the Champions of Nafarat. I mean, at the very least, they're going to keep the lines solid with how many of them there are. Whether they can actually pull out a victory, it would be the ultimate advertisement for how the Pelagia Marines can be good in melee. If they were to do something good here. The Wards of Minas Ithil are doing well. As you would expect, the Serpent's Fang is giving them a good fight, but will it be enough? The Hashari, I mean, they will kill off the Rangers, but as a result, I think the Citadel Guard will stand victorious over here. How many of them will be left? Probably just over 30 of them. But that is just over 30 Citadel Guard, which can recharge the rest of the Harad army. And that could be the difference maker here. I mean, they need to hurry, because those Pelagia Marines, if they rout, if 114 fighting men rout at this stage, then it will be all over, and Harad will be victorious. Minas Ithil. There's the catapult. I mean, he is going to try and get to the catapult. It's too late at this point, though, because even if you do remount the catapult, you're not going to be able to change the results of the battle. Either you win straight up over here, or your force loses and the enemy infantry will just be able to charge into you and close the distance to the catapult without too many problems. So you may as well commit the catapult crew to melee, to be honest with you, to try and help do the business. The Southrons could rout here, though. Wards of Minas Ithil fighting evenly with the Serpent's Fangs. There's 2 units of them in there. One, though, is only 4 men strong. 1 Champion of Nafarat, 21 Champions of Nafarat. It is close, and it is 99% to 99%. Yes, and this is what I'm talking about. The catapult crew, they're more useful for just being in and amongst the melee fight at this point, trying to do what they can. They're obviously not very good in melee, but this is the sort of thing which might make the difference. I mean, 24 extra bodies in the line is the sort of thing which can change the battle at this point. So many of these units are shaken. It could be a case of who routs first. Serpent's Fangs doing the business. Those Citadel Guard are starting to fall away now that they're up against some good units. Another Harad General falls, though. Is this going to be enough to convince a rout to take place? Wards of Minas Ithil victorious, really, against the Serpent's Fangs, who have largely turned around to try and meet those Citadel Guard. The Wards of Minas Ithil need to pull through as well. Back come the catapult crew. Are they going to get involved? I think Harad have got this, you know. I think at this point it's coming down to such a small amount of manpower that the fact there are still champions of Nafarats on the field, 18 of them, I think is going to be too much. Can they rout those Southron when they can? That's a game changer. Harad are the first ones to suffer a rout. The catapult crew are going to have to get in here to try and plug some sort of gap, at least temporarily. Serpent's Fangs are still here, 27 of them. I think the Southron pikemen are still fighting, are they not? The warband aren't. Actually, there aren't any pikemen remaining, are there? 16 champions of Nafarats, 6 Hashari. The Pelagia Marines break, but there are so few of them at this point. They held on longer than the Southrons did. But Warns of Minas, yeah, it's going to be Harad this. The champions of Nafarat are going to be too strong with those Serpent's Fangs and Warns of Minas Ithil. They're decent in melee, but they're not going to be able to carry the day here, so Harad are going to win this. And if Gondor had just been a little bit more organised with how they did that, if they weren't... That's capturing him? Bringing down that nasty looking sword. Be quite the turn up if Harad were more civilised than we gave them credit for. But yeah, if they'd just been a little bit more organised in pushing up this hill, Gondor had the battle, I think, in the palm of their hands. They could have had a lot of numbers on the front line backed up with guards of Osgiliath with their skirmishers, they would have won. But their infantry assault on the hill was so messy that all of the good work they'd done throughout this road up to the palace was effectively for naught. And Harad are going to be victorious here. 1% the difference. Hard fought it was, but the defenders win. A long fight. Could, in terms of frames, be the longest. Actually, no, I think I did a 70k plus frames one on Minas Tirith once, didn't I? But still, one of the longest battles I've done, certainly. And a good settlement to show that off with Harad victorious on their home patch. Gondor, their second defeat in as many battles. Let's see what did the damage for the Haradrim. So Serpent's Fangs, good throughout the battle. Champions of Nafarat, towards the late game, they were that bit of quality that they had and how good they are against a force like Gondor really did show itself. A few other units breaking 100. Southron Pikes, Southron Archers, again the real unsung heroes this battle, I think, because they did good with their ammunition, and then time and time again we saw them plugging gaps on the front line to buy time for the rest of the army, and they did so well. Serpent's Fangs did well throughout as well. Hashari Stalkers doing well as you'd expect from Rangers. Southron Archers again doing okay. More kills for the Southron Warband, interestingly enough, getting over 200 each. That's a very good return on such a unit. Serpent's Fangs doing slightly less well in this army, but still well enough. Trollmen of Harad, by the time they were being committed, it was really a battle of quality, so it was unsurprising to see them do decently well, but not spectacular. Several units getting over 200, including those champions of Nafarat. They could have been the heroes towards the end. Their ability to rout units well documented. The dismounted Serpent Guard throughout the field actually doing less well than you would expect, but other units picking up the slack, including the Southron Archers once again. So yeah, interesting fight that. I think neither side were. I think it was when it's a battle that's that close, you can say that either side would have deserved it towards the end. But Harad ultimately punishing Gondor for a kind of slapdash push up the hill towards the end there, and yeah, very, very well done. And they managed to do so without the Demons of the Desert and without relying on Rangers too much as a crutch. Only one unit seen, and they didn't get too many kills, to be fair. For Rangers standards anyway, 377 is still significant, of course. But yeah, big thank you to Eclipse for sending this battle to me. Thank you for allowing me to show off this new map as well. And a big thank you to all of the players that were part of this battle replay as well. Always good to see more custom scenarios, and this was an especially good one. So yeah. As for what's going forward, I mean, by this point we'll be close to April, I think, by the time this battle comes out. So I'll have a much better idea of how things are going to be progressing by that point, because I'm still in early February as we are recording this. But yeah, it's kind of a tricky situation to know exactly how things are going to work moving forward now that I know exactly what's going to be happening. But yeah, we shall see. It's one of those things that I will talk about a little bit closer to the time, I think, when everything is set up. And hopefully this can be a good thing for the channel as well, because hopefully it can be... I can get a better internet connection, and hopefully things can be a little bit smoother from that perspective, but we'll have to wait and see on that one. That could still go either way, to be honest. We'll see. Regardless, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.